Welcome to In the News for May the 27th, 2022. I am Brett Burney from appsandlaw.com.
This is Jeff Richardson from iPhone JD. Brett, it's a big day, end of the year in the Richardson household today. My son finished 10th grade last night. My daughter finishes 8th grade today, so she's got like a little graduation ceremony in a few hours.
Yay.
So it's a time of transition. It's
congratulations to the Richardsons. That is fantastic, Jeff. Okay, well, thank you for spending a little bit of time with us this morning, and let's jump in so that you can get to the celebrations today on this. Lots of good stuff that you are linking to today. And why don't we start off first with a little bit of a focus on Apple privacy with I don't normally read Elle magazine, Jeff, but this caught my eye. I think somebody had linked to this, and I'm so glad that you posted it as well. This is a really nice, comprehensive, kind of like an all-around, well-rounded interview with Apple's chief of privacy. Her name is Jane Horvath. I don't know if I'd ever read anything by her, but this was such a really nice, interesting little interview. And because it's Elle magazine, not only did they talk about some of I guess more of the policy type stuff that you and I would be interested in, but I just loved how they painted her as a person and how she's even concerned about her own children, and what they're accessing online, that kind of a stuff. And it was just a really neat insight here in this interview.
It is. It's fun because it's interesting, her own background. She talks about her first job working at Baskin-Robbins and how she took the LSAT almost on a lark. And next thing you know, she ends up in law school. But she's had lots of interesting jobs over the years and then sort of found herself at Apple, which she said was always one of her dream jobs. And she's been there for the last decade. But as you said, she's in charge of privacy. And it's always interesting hearing from these folks that, are that make these decisions. And, one part of the article that jumped out at me is she talks about when she first comes to the company and she has this, I'll read this. She says, from my very first meeting, when we were debating what data the engineers can collect off of a device, a colleague said to me, well, we might be able to string this data together to all the other data we're collecting and somehow identify someone. And we don't want to do that. And I thought, wow, I have arrived at a place that really, really protects privacy. And we've talked about this before, that the way to protect privacy is not to come up with your entire business model and then at the very end say, oh, and then what can we do to tweak this to sort of protect privacy? You need to be thinking about it from the very beginning. Every time you collect data, you need to pause and say, wait a minute, do we need this data? And if so, could we piece this together with something else? Because although we in this room might not want to use it to exploit people's privacy, other people might. And so this is why some people give Apple flack for touting privacy as just sort of a marketing speak. And there is a marketing aspect of it. It's a product differentiator between Apple and others. But I think that it comes from a really sincere place, that it's a company that's thinking about it at its core from the beginning, so that by the time the product is at its end stage, privacy has been baked in. And I think more and more, because nobody else in the tech sphere, it seems like, is really respecting privacy nowadays. Everybody's trying to sell your information and everything else. There are some exceptions. There are other companies like DuckDuckGo that, of course, for the most part, are pretty good. But Apple has always been a leader in this front, and so it makes me feel better about using Apple products. So anyway, it's an interesting interview in Elle, worth taking a look at. But also, it's just further reinforcing what we've been hearing from others, that privacy is not an accident at Apple. There's a reason that the products respect your privacy.
I think that was a nice takeaway, just to see. I mean, she even talks a little bit about the tragedy, San Bernardino, that we've talked about several times, where, Apple was some people didn't appreciate the fact that Apple wasn't trying to get access to the information on that phone, but she gives a little bit of insight into that. I just love, again, I mentioned earlier, she has an 18-year-old daughter that she talks about here in Elle magazine. And just about the fact that, the things that I know you and I think about with our own children, and so many people do, about, you got to think about this. If you share pictures with, members of your teenage group, they could show up in so many other places, and that can have some, not necessarily devastating effects, but it could certainly come back to haunt you in some aspects. And apparently her work from home snack is popcorn as well. So I just love the fact that, so often we don't get some insight into some of the executives at Apple, and this was just really neat. That I appreciated that they did a nice little interview on here. So let's go to our friend David Sparks. Not that he was interviewed in Elle magazine, although I guess he could. That would be another fascinating interview. But this was a neat post that he had here. I hadn't even thought of it this way, Jeff, but he goes in and talks about 11 years of 5 gigabytes. And what he's referring to is when June 2011, when Steve Jobs announced iCloud storage, right? This was a pretty big thing. At the time, we already had Dropbox and Box and some of the other services, and iCloud already had iCloud Drive, and it was different formats and way that Apple had presented this. But in 2011, they announced everybody was going to get 5 gigabytes of iCloud storage.
Which was
in 2011, 5 gigabytes was great. Exactly, Jeff. And so you would think over 11 years, maybe they increased that a little bit, but no. And that's exactly what David was talking about here.
Yeah, my favorite line of the article is that we've had 5 gigabyte for 11 years, which is longer than the Beatles were together. So it's like, that's been a long time. I was looking at my own phone after I read this article, and I have the Apple One plan, the premier level, whatever
exactly.
It is. And so I've got 2 terabytes for my family. And for me personally, I currently have about 600, 700 gigabytes of that. And now that's the reason it's so big is because I've got my photo collection, which is being synced. It's got a lot of videos in there.
Exactly.
The rest of my family together, my wife and my 2 kids, is maybe 300, 400 gigabytes of data total. So, if there was a 1 terabyte plan, that would be enough for me. Having a 2 terabyte is enough for my family. But all of these numbers, I mean, even my daughter, which is the smallest one on here, she, I think, was still like 30 gigs. So, I mean, a 5 gigabyte plan is laughable. It's not enough to back up your phone, which Apple wants you to do. And as David says in this article, Apple appears to be just trying to monetize. They want to upsell you. And again, I don't fault somebody for trying to make money, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
It's
and
just
David points that out.
5 gig is a little bit small. It'd be nicer if it was a little bit more. And the flip side of it is when you buy your iPhone, I really think that it's worth, assuming that you're going to back up to iCloud, which most people do nowadays, you need to get a higher tier.
Well, to me, that's exactly it. Like by default, that's where your photos go. And every single time that I've had someone come up and ask me a question about this, Jeff, they say, hey, I'm getting these messages on my phone that my storage is full. Now, they say storage. And of course, my next question is that iCloud storage or is that local phone storage? Okay. Right. And so it's a little confusing to most, quote, normal people, right? That just want to use their phone to take pictures of the cute puppies that they have or their kids. But that's exactly what fills up so quickly because by default, which is good, your photos automatically update or sync to your iCloud storage. It's fantastic. Now, actually, I think some of that, maybe the photos don't count toward your storage or there's something, well, I forget how Apple's tried to navigate this before, right?
Yeah, it depends upon how you do it. But if you have your photos sort of local on your phone, like I do, I tell my phone to keep the photos there as much as possible, then I am using up storage.
Okay,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So anyway, that was the whole thing. I guess I hadn't thought about this from David's story because it's been many, many years, Jeff, just like you, I'm sure, that I started paying for additional iCloud storage, right? Because I ran into the exact same issue where all my photos and videos of the kids throughout the years, they just, I went through 5 gigabytes in like no time flat. And to your point, you just mentioned as well, by default, iCloud will back up your devices. Well, I ran out of that a long time ago. You can pay, I think I was paying maybe $3 a month for like 200 gigabytes, right? And then just like you recently, I upgraded to the Apple One subscription, which gives us 2 terabytes to share. And that's a lot, but I'm paying for that, right? Anyway, it's just really interesting. I had never thought about this just because a long time ago, I already was paying for additional iCloud storage. But even my mother, Jeff, she takes a lot of pictures. She's paying $1 a month now, 99 cents to upgrade to, I think it's the 50 gig, right? But like even my mother, like all she does is play games and take pictures on her phone. Bless her heart. But she runs into this issue. And that's exactly what I've had to do. Like almost everybody that I know that uses their phone for pictures is doing this. And anyway, good points to raise. And thanks for linking to that. But in my estimation, Apple definitely should be upgrading this. I mean, 11 years, that's enough time that we should be getting a little bit more instead of like maybe forcing people to pay things. Something else coming up very soon. WWDC. People have heard us talk about this before. This is the Worldwide Developers Conference. You and I are getting very excited about this. Monday, June 6th is the kickoff. And apparently Tim Cook, apparently with some other executives, will take the stage for a keynote presentation. And then that whole week is for mostly developers, right? But you had a couple of nifty links today about what we're hoping that we could see with the announcements on June 6th. This first one here is iPadOS. Boy, we could really use some of these features.
Yeah, this was Michael Simon at Macworld. He wrote a pretty good article predicting what we might see in iPadOS. And the theme of what I personally want and this article is really the same.
Yeah.
And it's a single word. It's 3 letters. Pro. And here's my take on this. The iPad Pro has been out for a long time now, right?
Pro.
And it is nice because it's a more advanced version of the hardware for the iPad. And then, as you and I have discussed in the past, the iPad Air, which is the mid-level iPad, has gotten so good recently that although it doesn't have Pro in the name, it is basically a Pro device. You can get professional. So from a hardware standpoint, it used to be Pro at the top, and then that's filtered down so that even the middle level has got the very fast hardware, the nice screen, everything else. So the hardware has been Pro for a while, but the software for the iPad, in my mind, just hasn't quite gotten there. I still feel when I'm using my iPad Pro device, I feel like the iPad OS is sort of, for the most part, the same simplistic stuff that you would expect on an entry-level iPad. What I really want is more professional features from a million different ways. And Michael has ideas on how that can work here, whether it be multiple users or whether it be, improved multitasking. Multitasking has gotten better over the years. It's better now, but it still could be more. He throws out maybe floating windows like you'd have on a computer. I don't know if floating windows is the way to go for an iPad. It works on a computer. I don't know if it works on an iPad as well. But however Apple does it, more professional apps. My hope that, it would make me feel fantastic if after the presentation in 10 days from now, I felt like, wow, the iPad OS is going to have more pro features. And it's okay to have some of them a little hidden so that maybe they don't scare away, introductory users. That's totally fine. But I hope that it comes. And he has some ideas for how it may come here.
These are great. These are great. And I got to tell you, I think I mentioned this now that I've got my larger 12.9 iPad Pro with the Magic Keyboard. I think I've said this before, Jeff. I feel like that there's not that much difference now between my MacBook Pro and my iPad Pro. And I mean that in the sense that I feel like I have 2 laptops, but I will tell you that if I have to choose, I find myself going more often to the MacBook Pro, because if I'm trying to accomplish something, I feel like that's where I feel the limitations. Maybe that's coming at it from the opposite direction, but I almost feel like I would like to use my iPad Pro to get this document or to create an article or something, and I could do it on the iPad Pro, but Jeff, I feel like it would take me just maybe 2 or 3 extra steps to do that on the iPad Pro than I would do it on the MacBook Pro. I hope sort of that makes sense. And the sense that's where I saw this article was like, yes, please give me some more Pro capabilities within the iPad Pro, because it can certainly handle it. We know it can handle it. But it's like, I would like to be able to give, my iPad Pro a little bit more desktop time, even over the MacBook Pro. I know that may sound a little silly, but those are the things that I was thinking on here, like the external monitor support. I would love to see a little bit more the floating window, some of the multitasking on there. So anyway, it remains to be seen. You and I will definitely be talking about this after June 6th when Apple comes out with some of those announcements. In addition to that, you had another excellent little article that you posted to while we were looking for the Outlook on iPadOS. What about the HomePod? You like your HomePod, Jeff. I'm hoping that Apple will make some announcements on that too.
Yeah. So as a reminder to everybody, Apple came out with the original HomePod, which was the big one, which was hundreds of dollars. And, people claimed it never sold very well. Apple hasn't released those numbers, but perhaps that was true. Then they came out with the HomePod Mini, which is the $100 version that I have in my house. It's great. I really like it. And the speculation from a number of different sources, including, folks that sort of look at the supply chain, is that Apple's going to come out with new version or versions of the HomePod sometime soon. And it won't necessarily be a replacement for the big model that was discontinued a while ago, but maybe sort of a new spin on it. So it could be another big model, maybe just a less expensive version of the big model, maybe like $180 version of the big model that would be sort of in between. And the justification that I hear people give for that is they say that a HomePod Mini doesn't quite fill a room with sound the way that a larger one would. Now, let me just pause on that for a second. I've got a HomePod Mini. it fills my living room just fine. Not that long ago, I put two of them together to make like a stereo pair.
Right.
Admittedly, I'm not having like, loud house parties like I was, in an episode of Euphoria on HBO or something like that. But so maybe at some level you would need more volume. But I mean, certainly for the Richardson household, it's more than enough volume. But regardless, I guess it would be a more full sound. But then there's also speculation that Jason Snell has in here, like maybe we could have a HomePod that is made for a TV room. So it would be like a sound bar.
Right.
And maybe you could even have a camera on it so that you could sit in your living room and have FaceTime conversations with others with a camera that's looking at you. Interesting idea. Or maybe you could have a HomePod, he said, that really lives in the kitchen with a screen on it.
I see that.
So it's not quite as powerful as an iPad. And, this idea has been around for forever. I remember back in the year 2000, I believe it was, back when I was using a Palm device, a Palm.
The Palm Treo.
The company that owned Palm at the time was called 3Com, and they came out with a device called the Audrey, which was like a small screen with like a Palm type screen, but bigger. And it was made to sit in a kitchen, sort of named after like Audrey Hepburn. And the idea is it would be your central device for like your calendar and, family information, and it would sync with your Palms. And it lasted about 6 months before they discontinued it. Apparently nobody bought it. But that idea of sort of, the digital equivalent of the cork pin board that you might have in a kitchen where everybody like puts the things of what's going on. It's an interesting idea. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we would buy one if Apple came out with it, but it's the idea is the HomePod has definitely got some legs, and there's more interesting things that can come out. So it'll be interesting to see if Apple explores this.
I like that Jason makes this comment. Here's my idea. Just like Amazon, keep it simple. Offer remote control, Apple TV mode for simple navigation. I never got into the HomePod aspect, even the HomePod Mini, but I got to tell you, listening to you talk about it over all these months, it's like, I would, if they came out with maybe another iteration of it, I would very much like to see what they're going to do. And that could be interesting.
Yeah, and maybe coordinate more with HomeKit and stuff like that. But then we can go on forever and speculate.
Right.
We'll see.
We have been talking about this interesting little component here where, let me just get this out of the way. Apple eventually caved in. Is that a right way to say it? A lot of people wanted Apple to give them the ability to repair their own devices. And you and I have talked about this, and almost we were both of us have been adamant about the fact that why would you ever want to go into this? Just take it to an Apple store. But on the other hand, I definitely see the justification for a lot of people saying, hey, we want to have the tools. Well, Apple gave those tools. And you and I have talked about some of these stories. It ain't no small tools, right? It's not like that they send you a little screwdriver in the mail. No, they send you 79 pounds of 2 Pelican cases of all of the equipment that actually their own Apple geniuses, their own Apple stores will use. And there have been some fun stories and fun videos about this. You linked today to Brian Chen in the New York Times, where I don't know, a little bit of a different slant on this. He wasn't very happy with this ability here.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's an interesting story because he shows the process of repairing your own battery, which is sort of interesting. But both this story by Brian X. Chen and after I wrote this, there was another one that was in The Verge that I linked to. But both of these authors were basically having the same theme of, oh my goodness, it's so complicated to repair it. And, why is Apple sending all these complicated, expensive parts? I mean, it's like saying that, I'd like to repair my car and my home, but can't you just send me something really small that I could repair my home? No, repairing a car, replacing the carburetor or the battery in a car is complicated, and you need sophisticated equipment. And Apple is sending you the exact same equipment they use in their own stores. Wow. And so you can't, I mean, that's not a bad point. That's a good thing that you're getting the same equipment. You can't complain that they're sending you something lesser. And, Brian X. Chen says that he tried to replace his battery and he ended up breaking a screen. I'm like, oh, well, that's a shame. And then 2 paragraphs later, he says, oh, and then I realized I skipped a step and I didn't remove some screws. Like, well, so if you don't remove the screws and you try to take the screen apart, you know what? It's going to crack. Yeah. So this is not for the faint of heart. I don't encourage that anyone do this, just because you want to replace your screen or just because you want to replace your battery. Right. On the other hand, if you're a tinkerer and you want to see how things work and you don't mind risking, if you just want the satisfaction of knowing that you replaced it yourself, even with the risk that you might break something, then heck, go for it. It's fantastic that Apple even gives you this option. And, there was also a complaint that, it's expensive to have to rent all this equipment for $50. But given how heavy this stuff is, as you said, there's no way that Apple is not subsidizing the shipping costs alone of sending you all this stuff and you sending it back. So I realize that people have a legitimate complaint that Apple probably started this program kicking and screaming to a little bit. Apple would have been just as happy to say, no, you can't repair it yourself. Come to the stores. It's probably because of the right to repair movement that they finally decided to do this to avoid some regulation. Fine, I will grant that. But to complain that it's hard to do and that it's complicated, I don't really think that that's a fair complaint. I think it's neat that you can do it if you want to, but heck, if I am going to get my own iPhone fixed, there's no way in the world that I would try to do it myself.
Well, I think your thoughts are shared by John Gruber over at Daring Fireball. You linked to his story, and the title is "The Grave Insult of Being Sent the Proper Tools to Perform a Complicated Task." He
says it better than I could. That's a good
He
phrase.
does. It's a good article. Pretty much, I don't know if you need to go read it because you're pretty much hearing the exact same thing. It's like, why would you complain that you need to have the right to repair, and then on the other hand, you complain that this equipment is too hard to use or too much to use? And actually, we've seen other things where people have done a very good job. If you follow the instructions, and it takes 2 or 3 hours, but if you do everything exactly what they tell you, just like you said, if you're a tinkerer, it comes out fine. There's been a lot of people that have said, this is great, I was able to repair it, but I probably just wouldn't go through it again because it took too long, and it's a very bulky process on doing it, but it is possible. Anyway, I'm sure we haven't heard the end of this, but hopefully we have. But I'm sure there'll be more people that'll be talking about it. Another interesting thing you linked to, Jeff, was Google Maps. So you and I have talked about Google Maps versus Apple Maps. I got to tell you, I keep trying both of them. And me personally, I keep falling in line with Google Maps. I just feel like they continue to do a better job on the Apple phone, and especially even in CarPlay and stuff. And Google continues to add additional features, and a few of them you listed here in this 9 to 5 Google link, which you don't normally link to 9 to 5 Google, right? 9 to 5 Mac, you normally do. Anyway, this was a really interesting little update, and one specifically for me is the history of Street View. But I like this whole thing here.
Yeah, Street View has been out for just about as long as the iPhone came out. Street View came out in 2007. And since then, we've had this fantastic ability to not just look at an overhead map, but to actually be as if you were standing in front of the place and you can look around. And I'm sure everybody listening to this have used it before. It's great before you go to a place for the first time to look around and say, oh yeah, the building's going to look like this, and it's just down from the McDonald's, and it's just have a sense of what the area looks like. Google Street View is fantastic. I love it. So the new feature that they're coming out with is the ability to, if you are looking at the Street View for a location, you can say, I would actually like to see older pictures of this exact same location, which is useful for so many different reasons that you could, like, first of all, it might be interesting historically to see what this looked like before the building was there, or it may be a particular angle on the day that the Google vehicle went by and took the picture doesn't quite capture what you wanted to see. So if you look at one from a year or two earlier, you're like, oh, now I can see because of this, angle and stuff. Now, historical Street View has been available on the web browser for a while, but it's now coming to the mobile things.
Yes.
And so it's going to be on the iPhone, and the way it's going to work, and as you and I discussed before the show, you are already living in the future because it's on your phone. It's not on mine yet.
I love it.
But when you are looking at a Street View picture right now, it will tell you underneath that this picture was taken 9 months ago or 2 years ago, whatever it is.
Right.
But on your phone, Brett, unlike mine, right next to where it says this was taken 9 months ago, it also says, click here. What is it? Like, click here for other pictures.
See more dates. It says see more dates.
And what do you see?
And so sure enough, so I've got little boxes at the bottom now when I tap on that it's July 2019, which apparently is the most recent picture of this particular intersection I'm looking at. But then I can choose August 2018, July 2017, September 2015, September 2013, and September 2009.
So you can really go back. Wow.
I can go all the way back for this particular intersection. Again, you have to have the Street View there. But that's really cool. Like, I'm looking at this intersection that I drive by almost every other day or so, and sure enough, I can see what it looked like even about 8 to 10 years ago almost on there. And that's Brett, really incredible.
That might actually be complete, because although Street View came out in 2007, it only had a few cities at first, and they added to it. Or so it wouldn't surprise me if that 2009 one may actually be the first time that that may be the first one that Google ever took of the intersection. So this is a great tool, and to have this in the power of your palm, with an iPhone.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
So useful. So great.
Yeah. I'm excited to see how they're going to continue to do that. Happy birthday to Street View, man! 15 years. That's incredible.
You're right. It has been 15 years long.
Now, we have talked about AirTags quite a bit on our little podcast here, and it never fails to amaze me that there are additional stories. You linked to 2 of them today. One, apparently around Portland, Oregon, right? A robbery happened, but I guess unfortunately for the robber, but fortunately for the victim, there was an AirTag in this backpack that they took off with, and they were able to track that down.
Police often say that the number one way that they catch criminals is because criminals are dumb, and this guy had been stealing things all day long, and there had been reports to the police department, and then finally at the end of the day he takes somebody's knapsack, and it just so happens that knapsack had an AirTag in it, so the guy was able to give it to the police officers, and they tracked him down. So if he had stopped his stealing spree just one step earlier, he might have gotten away with it, but
might have gotten away with it.
And then the flip side of it was the one that I had from the Points guy.
The Points guy, yes.
My friend Ernie Svensson sent me this link, which was so he was trying to get his luggage, and he had checked his skis for a ski trip. And when he's at the luggage carousel, his luggage wasn't there. And they said, "I'm sorry, we don't know where your luggage is." And he said, "Well, you don't know where it is, but I do.
But I do.
I have an AirTag with my bag with my skis in it." He goes, "And you can see it's right next to the plane." And so the woman at the gate, the agent calls, and sure enough, because it was a bulky item, they had put it
large
to
item.
The side of the airplane, and it was still out there on the tarmac. And so thanks to that information, instead of him, who knows when he would have gotten his skis, they were able to grab him and bring him right to him. And
look at that. It's right there.
Exactly. There's a picture of it. That is a perfect use of an AirTag that, they may think they've lost it, but where your stuff is. So if you need a little tip for why AirTags can be useful, this is a great story.
Cool. I mean, what would you do in that? So, you would just say, okay, and have to walk away, right? And hopefully that the airline, somebody would see this bag sitting there and maybe, try to track it down. But just having that little bit of a power in your, on your phone, just really incredible. Good stuff on that. And lastly, as you always want to do, I love this. This was a neat little video you linked to at the bottom of your post today, Jeff. This is David Pogue, who we have known and loved for many, many years. Used to be at the New York Times for a long, long time. Now he does little video snippets for CBS Sunday Morning and some other places that he does. But this was a really interesting video that he did, looking a little more in depth at the Apple Watch, and more specifically from he called it like a general health tracker or health monitor, right? Which I really liked on this. He talked to Apple folks and he talked to some other folks as well. Really neat little story here.
Yeah, and it's because the device is literally attached to your body, it's really monitoring you all the time. I mean, you can imagine going to a doctor and the doctor saying, "Well, we want to keep an eye on something, so we're going to have to keep this thing attached to you 24/7, or at least as long as you're awake." And you'd be like, "Oh my goodness, that's so obtrusive." But your watch, you don't mind having on you all day long. And so when he was interviewing, for example, the doctor to say at Apple, she was describing how you may think that you're at risk for AFib, which is what atrial fibrillation, whatever. And when you go into your doctor and they run the test, you're fine. But the device that's on your arm, all day long, it may pick up the one point in the day when your heartbeat is irregular, even though it wasn't irregular at the time that you were in your doctor's office. And so it can provide you with really essential information to know that you need to go in and get something checked out. So, but this video is particularly interesting because David Pogue doesn't just talk about what it can do today, like the AFib stuff, but he actually interviews the guy who you're showing right now, who's a professor at Stanford, who is talking like in the future, the things that it might check. And he shared a personal story, and I've actually heard this one before. I don't think the Apple Watch does this one yet. I think it's actually the Fitbit that has this feature. Maybe it'll come to the Apple Watch, that by his Fitbit was able to predict that he might have COVID about 2 or 3 days before he actually tested positive.
Incredible.
And it's because of some metric. Now, and he admitted that it would give him the same reading, not just if he had COVID, but also if he was just working excessively. There's a lot of false positives, in other words, but still it is a way. And so he's, envisions a time 5-10 years in the future where these devices like the Apple Watch and future generations can provide you with all sorts of information at an early stage. And, we often hear from medical professionals that early detection, learning about something at a time when you can still do something about it, for many people will make the difference in your health. So it's a neat article for what we have today and what might be coming in the future for the Apple Watch and similar devices.
The one quote I enjoyed from this professor was, "You're not going to drive a car without a dashboard." Right? We know about the early warning lights that come on, or the check engine light or so. And, a lot of us almost dismiss it because it's like, oh, we're fine. We can keep driving. But the fact that light came on that at some point you need to get something checked out. And I never thought of it quite the way that he had envisioned that, but he was talking about some of these health trackers are exactly along the lines of what you're saying, Jeff, is like, it could just give you like a little flag to say, you might want to just check this out. Right. And I just like that idea of like having a dashboard or a monitor on that. Good stuff. Nice little video. I'll put a link in there as well. In the know. My tip for today is something that I know probably we've mentioned before, and I know that you probably know about this very well. But because I have been very much enjoying my new iPad Pro with my brand new 2nd generation pencil, I use that 1st generation pencil, Apple Pencil, a lot, Jeff, and I had not upgraded to the 2nd generation Apple Pencil, and I knew that I was just going to love it, and I absolutely do. But I got to tell you, one of the things that I very much enjoy on this, I use Notability quite a bit as my note-taking app. You use GoodNotes, I know. And this would work across all of these apps, by the way. If I'm writing something and I'm writing a note, right? But I want to undo something, or I want to erase it. What I would typically do is I'd be writing along just fine, and then I messed up. I have to take my hand off the screen and I go hit the undo button in Notability or wherever, or I take my hand off the screen and tap on the eraser button in Notability or whatever app that I'm using, and then I go down and then I got to go back and tap into the pen. So that's not that big of a deal, but if you have a 2nd generation Apple Pencil, this is the only thing it works on, you can actually keep your hand on the screen and just simply take your finger and go tap, tap on the pencil. And by default, what that will do will immediately switch between your writing tool and your eraser tool. Now you can customize this. You can go to the settings, and there's I think two other options. You can say switch between current tool and the last used tool. So if you have a pen and a highlighter, that's a very good one. Or the double tap can show the color palette. So if you want to change the color of your pen, you can do that. Or the other option is you can just turn it off. But oh my goodness, I would say this has streamlined my handwriting note-taking, Jeff. I love it. I'm just doodling along, just writing along, and all of a sudden I mess up. I go pop, pop, just the double tap on my Apple Pencil. I erase what I did, tap, tap again, go back to my writing tool, and I just keep on going. It's hard to explain unless you use it yourself, but to me, this just makes me feel even more efficient. Usually when I'm using a regular number 2 pencil, if you mess up, you had to take your hand off, flip the pencil over, and erase with the bottom, right? But now the fact that I can just go tap, tap without moving my hand off the screen, I love it. So that's my in-the-know tip for today, is going in and customizing the double tap on your 2nd generation Apple Pencil.
That's great. And so that, hearing that you were going to share that tip, which I use, every day and have been using every day for years. I'm so glad that you're finally there too and have the tools.
Okay, good. I'm catching up.
Using an iPad as a whiteboard at your home. And what I mean by this is if you connect your iPad to your television, and then you use an app like Notability, which is what you're using, or Good Notes, which is what I use. You can then share the screen so that everybody looking at the TV can see the same thing that you're seeing on your iPad. Now, why might you want to do this? A number of different reasons. And one that I've been doing for like the last 10 days is, my kids are, they're just finishing up their exams. And for both my daughter and my son, when they were working through math problems, some of which were quite complicated, they asked if I would sort of help them sort of go through the problems. And, some of the problems were within my knowledge and some of them were just a little beyond what I know. It's interesting when your kids get old enough that they're doing things that are complicated enough. You're like, oh, I guess I can help them that. But so what we did is we would go through some problems together. And sometimes we would actually sketch it on the iPad so that one person could be doing the problem and the other person could be looking on the screen. Or what we would often do is there might be like a page of a handout or a textbook that would have some problems in it, right? And so what I would do is take a picture of that page, and then in Good Notes, it's super easy to just insert a picture. There's just a little command at the top that you got your most recent 10 pictures. So you can just tap the little icon showing it, and it inserts that picture. So we've taken a page with problems. We have inserted that picture onto the page of Good Notes. And so now the page is there and I can write on it using the Apple Pencil. And since I'm sharing it to the screen, my son or daughter could be solving the problem while I'm working it. And, if they have questions, we were able to talk through it this week doing it. And it was really, really nice. And it was so much nicer than just having like a worksheet that one person's writing on in a pencil so that you could erase and it's hard to see. And then I can't see what they're doing at the same time. This was just a wonderful way for us to talk through problems together and really just, help them study. And I enjoyed doing it. And I'll share one tip that I learned from it. And this is in Good Notes, and I don't know how it works the same in Notability, but so since I had the page of the Good Notes, and then on top of that, I had the image, which was just the photograph of the page from the textbook. And then on top of that, I had the handwriting that we would write. And sometimes just to sort of have space on the page, I might want to move something that we had sort of handwritten and move it over to the left so that we have more space to write. And I noticed that sometimes when I used the lasso tool to select, it would move not only what we wrote, but also the picture underneath, which does me no good because then when I move it to the left, the whole thing's moved to the left. But in Good Notes, if you tap once on the lasso tool, a little menu pops up and there are on-off switches that you can say, does the lasso tool select the handwriting? Yes or no. The images, which for me was like the underlying image of the page, yes or no. The text boxes, if you just inserted some like text and comments. And so just keep in mind that you have these options because sometimes you might want the lasso tool to select everything, in which case just have it all turned on. But other times you may actually want the image to stay in place so that you only are selecting your handwriting and you can move the handwriting, but have the image underneath. And I guess I knew in the back of my head that this was a feature, but because I had not really used it in years, I forgot it was there. And once I found it, I was like, oh, this makes perfect sense. And then after figuring that out with homework, I was actually using it in work the other day because I was taking notes when I was on a conference call with a client, and I had something on the page that was like an image and something in my notes. And I did a selection and I moved, and the image wasn't moving. It wasn't like really an image. It was just something I had copied from it was like a product diagram that I was annotating. And I'm like, why is the image not moving? And I was like, that's right. I turned off selection of the image. So I changed it one way for home and then I wanted a different way for work. So it's nice to know that this option's out there. So, that's sort of a geeky option if you use it. Yeah. But to back up, using your iPad as a digital whiteboard so that you can share something with everything in your home on your television. Many of us have larger TVs now, and it's a great way that you can share things. It works really well. So if you own an iPad and if you own a TV that has any way to AirPlay to it, whether it's an Apple TV or the TV's got that function built in, you now have a home digital whiteboard that you can use for whatever you want to use.
That is so cool. I love that. And thanks for the extra tip on the lasso tool. I was just looking, Good Notes, you do have a lot of those options there. I was just talking with somebody yesterday about how to use the lasso tool when you're writing notes and you want to move some of the text around. Like we can't do that on paper, right? But I can move my handwriting to a different section. In Notability, I don't have those additional options there. It's a little bit different, but I know, but I'm so glad you pointed that out about the lasso tool. I mean, yeah, the whiteboard thing is very, very cool, but I love that lasso tool. And I find a lot of people don't use it just because, well, that's not how we grew up learning how to write with a pen and paper, right? But the fact that you can do that in a digital format, that's just so cool on that. Wow. Whew, that's a lot of stuff, Jeff. Thank you as always, my friend. Get to the Richardson graduation celebrations today. Man, thanks for joining us. Have an enjoyable long weekend to everyone, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Brett. Bye-bye, everybody.